Hi everyone, Amy here with your end of week wrap-up video for week 2. I'm going to be focusing on your writing prompt and your open discussions from last week, but I just want to give you some updates for week 3 quickly. Don't forget to check out our to-do list for week 3. This is our first peer review workshop week, and so it's going to be a little bit different. The most difficult part of facilitating the peer review workshops is making sure that every person only gives feedback to one person and that every person only gets feedback from one person. Once you guys start doubling up on each other, then we're going to end up some people who don't get feedback at all because I'm only requiring you to give feedback to one of your classmates. And so just make sure you're giving feedback to someone who has not yet received any feedback from anyone else as you complete this week's rough draft discussion. Also remember that this week's rough draft discussion is worth 10% on the assignment, so you have to have your rough draft posted on time and complete the peer review portion to get that credit. So make sure you are completing the discussion correctly this week, and then do please email me if you have any questions. All right, then as promised, I just want to jump right into talking about your discussions from last week, so we can start with our open discussion from week 2. Let me open that here. I did provide a lot of feedback in my midweek update from last week, so if you're confused about how to complete, especially the first few parts of this, please do go back and check out my midweek update. I know that there was some confusion about what Johnson's overall thesis was, and I want to make it clear that he is in praise of oversharing, or he's writing in praise of oversharing, which is why that's part of the title. So I might challenge those of you who thought he was against sharing information online to go back and reread the article with that knowledge in mind and look for places where he actually might be spinning it in favor of oversharing, with of course the caveat of kind of advising people on how to do so carefully and what the drawbacks can be if you don't do so carefully. Okay, but mostly today I want to focus on this final portion of the prompt, what the process was like for you guys, and how you felt about quoting versus paraphrasing and working in the attributive tags. If you're confused about the overall thesis itself, I want to remind you guys that the most successful paraphrase I saw in general was in Jessica Peck's post. She did pick out a pretty good quote and then did an even better job putting it in her own words. I would just add maybe a little bit more detail from the quote regarding how to make the decision based on a kind of personal literacy and the virtues and perils of privacy and publicness, requiring that we understand the pros and cons, and that we each decide for ourselves what is enough to put online. And so I would just add that last little bit here, but otherwise this is a strong paraphrase of Johnson's overall thesis in this particular article. So going back to focus on this last prompt here, I wanted to pull out what some of you said that I thought were particularly interesting insights and thoughtful comments regarding, the pros versus cons of each different strategy. So this person said, I thought it was easier to paraphrase his points by using my own words. This is the process I use most of the time when writing a paper on someone's article. I tend to want to paraphrase every paragraph or main point into my own words. I have been using the attributive tag whenever I write something without really knowing that it had a name. In almost all writing assignments, I'm required to cite work in some manner, so attributive tags are used all the time. And this is absolutely correct, and I just thought it was really interesting that this person seems to be picking up on these things without even knowing it. And so I'm hoping for some of you that that's going to happen a lot in this class. A lot of the stuff we're talking about is just good writing, and so if you've been doing some of these strategies already in your own lives, you might pick up on the fact that we are now just kind of giving them a more formal treatment here in this class. So typically it is easier to paraphrase than to quote. It'll be very difficult, especially when trying to come up with the thesis, to find an exact 1 or 2 sentence statement that really sums up everything in the article. So oftentimes it's very common that you'll have to put a lot of it in your own words really to be able to get everything across. And it's also a really effective reading strategy as you're going through a text to try to paraphrase every paragraph or main point into your own words, as this person says, because that way you're getting a really clear and solid understanding of the article on your own as you go through without really relying on or falling into any gaps in your understanding of the article. And then also what this person says about using attributive tags without really knowing what to call it is absolutely right on as well. I'm sure that a lot of you have been already doing these things in your other classes, and we're just trying to formalize that here. So this person says, I thought that both were easy for me. It all depends on what exactly you're using it for. The quote has Johnson's voice and argumentative flow equipped, while paraphrase can be twisted and changed to fit your piece of writing. I think that I would use paraphrasing in a debate type of writing and a quote during an informational piece about Stephen Johnson. And so this person is really right on to say that there are different uses and different times when quotes might be better or when paraphrase might be better. So you definitely want to quote when you're really trying to get across the voice or the way it sounds, as this person says, but if you're really just trying to get the idea across, you would use paraphrase. And so if you were working another writer's ideas in to support your own argument, it's oftentimes good to keep it in your own voice. But if you're really just trying to give us information about what Johnson says, for example, in a summary or in just some kind of informational piece about him, you may want to quote if you cannot get the same idea across in your own words. Because remember, in summary, you have to be accurate. So make sure that you can still put it in your own words and have it be true to the original meaning when you're paraphrasing. And then finally, this person says, it was easier to quote for me, but paraphrasing was not hard. By paraphrasing, I can write his statement in the way that interpreted it or in a way that's easier to understand, but quoting does not require a complete rewrite. An attributive tag wasn't hard to work with either. It was a simple matter of finding the right place in the sentence and inserting a tag that I see fit. So I think this is really insightful here. When you're paraphrasing, it does give you the opportunity to frame the information in a way that suits your writing or interpret it in some way, and it actually makes it easier to understand because you can simplify it and make it much more concise and straightforward when paraphrasing. I mean, these writers of these articles are professional writers, they're experts, they get paid to make it sound good, and so they're going to put their ideas across in a very complex, kind of colorful, eloquent way, even though it might not always be the most straightforward. So you can really simplify, make it easier to understand when paraphrasing. Thought it was interesting that this person brought this up. Quoting does not require a complete rewrite. I want to clarify here, you don't want to change the quote in any way if you are putting quotation marks around it. That too can be considered academic dishonesty. So if you're putting quotes around something, it has to be exactly word for word from the original. But that's not to say that you can't use ellipses, that little ... to omit something, as long as it doesn't change the content or meaning of the quote in any way if it's just too long and you can't get it all in there. And then this last sentence I thought was interesting because almost all of you had this in your posts, that an attributive tag was maybe a little intimidating at first, but once you found the place to put it in, then all you had to do was attach the author's name to the verb and insert it so that it didn't sound awkward. So I was glad to see that most of you were able to execute that correctly. So thank you to those of you who were able to come up with these strong ideas here. Okay, beyond your original threads, I just wanted to make a couple comments about the conversation in general. A lot of the feedback I saw in your comments to each other that were turned in by Friday was a lot of agree and disagree regarding the issue of sharing information online in general. And that's not exactly what I'm looking for in these writing prompts. You can use the open discussions for more of your agree and disagree, although I'll have more to say about that in just a minute. In general, when you're commenting on each other's work for the writing prompt discussions, I want you to focus on what is being charged of you in the prompt itself. So what is the prompt asking you to do, and how can you provide comments to each other that will point your classmates in the right direction regarding what the prompt is asking you to do. So instead of just talking about your feelings about how much we share on Facebook, I wanted to point out where some people were actually going a little bit further and talking about, was this the right thesis to pick out, or what is easier, quoting and paraphrasing? And that's where I really would have liked to see more of your conversation last week focus. So Chris here to Luke says, I agree with you on how easy quoting can be, but the problem is that you then have to focus on making your writing almost fit around your quote, which is true, just so you don't lose the quote's meaning to your piece. You might have to contextualize it a little bit, is what I think Christopher is saying here. And then Andrew popped in and continued the conversation a little bit more. This is exactly my problem when paraphrasing. Oftentimes I feel like it's an unnecessary effort to destruct and rebuild a phrase when a quote will suffice, and there's always the worry that some of the original intent will be lost. This is definitely the pitfall of paraphrasing, but I want to convey to you guys that the best way to prove to your reader that you actually understood the original article is to put it in your own words. So I will really be looking for a heavier emphasis on paraphrase when you write your summaries. So here's an example, just continuing in this thread, a couple of comments just about the issue of oversharing in general, which isn't really what I was looking for in this particular writing prompt. I was more looking for you to talk about the things that were addressed in the assignments 1 through 4 right here. The other thing I want to talk about with your comments on each other's posts is that with the writing prompts, it's important not to just put your original thread up and then walk away. This week, several of you only did your original post, and that's not going to get you a passing grade on the discussion. You actually have to complete the comments and reflection portions as well to get a passing grade on these assignments, so make sure you check out the writing prompt rubric under content if you're confused. And then finally, for the final component of your end of week reflections, I want to emphasize that the goal of this is not necessarily to reply to each of the comments that you received, but more to actually summarize the overall process of participating in the writing prompt discussion for that particular week. So one example here is Rocky's post, where Rocky goes in and replies to each of the comments he received, and that's fine to do, but that's not really what I'm looking for in the reflection. I'm looking for more of what Jessica's doing here, where she comes in and offers a really in-depth synthesis of everything she learned from completing the original post, getting some comments from her peers, and reading and commenting on other people's work, because you'll definitely learn a lot from seeing what other people have written as well. And another good example of that is Luke's here. So there was, as I just showed you guys, a pretty good conversation going on, and then Luke came in and summed it all up with his final reflection, which is definitely what I'm looking for throughout the process of these writing prompt discussions. So now going to the open discussions, we did a much better job this week just sticking to the 3 original threads and comments, so good job with that. I really appreciate you all following directions. I want to remind you all that you are required to post on 3 different days. You know, whether it's an original or a comment to one of the originals that's already there. It's okay if you want to post a couple of things on one day, but as far as getting the credit to fulfill the requirements that are on the rubric, you do need to check in on multiple days. And that's so that the conversation will keep going throughout the week and not everybody just tries to do everything on one day. And then the other thing I want to mention is that several of you guys are waiting until, you know, Friday, Saturday, or even Sunday to begin posting here. That's really difficult because you still have to get 3 different days, and you're going to be jumping around and trying to get in there every single day at the end of the week. But it's also a problem because according to the rubric, the grading is going to go down the later in the week you wait, because it's going to make it difficult for other people to reply and to make it a really robust back and forth discussion. If everybody waits till the end of the week, then there's not a lot of time for back and forth discourse. So please do start posting earlier, you know, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and that'll allow for a much more fruitful discussion throughout the week. So jumping into some of these threads, I want to point out that similar to the writing prompt discussion this week, in this open discussion, a lot of your thoughts were simply regarding whether you agreed or disagreed with what Johnson was saying regarding sharing online and your opinions about sharing online. Whereas according to the instructions in this discussion, I was much more interested in who you thought he was as a writer, who you thought his audience was, and how well you think he achieved his purpose. So instead of just commenting about the issue of oversharing and whether you agree or disagree with Johnson's ideas, try to focus on the topic that's presented in the discussion here as you do your original threads and your replies. Let me point out, for example, on Jessica's discussion, I think there was some confusion. You know, there's a lot of agree and disagree, but I think there was some confusion about whether or not the article is informative or persuasive. I want to look at what Chris had commented here. Some people are saying it's persuasive, but then Chris jumps in and says the purpose I felt isn't a persuasive article, but just to be mindful of what we post. And I just want to clarify that this here is an argument itself. To say that we need to be mindful of what we post as people online, that is actually an argument. That's a call to action. It's what we call a proposal argument. It's saying that something needs to be done. And so simply by saying that Johnson is saying we should do this, it is actually an argument and therefore persuasive. So again, now that I'm telling you it's persuasive, I would challenge those of you who thought it was informative to go back and reread the article and try to pick out places where he may be trying to manipulate the audience's opinion. And just because he gives you information doesn't mean it's persuasive. So I just want to clarify that and make sure that no one kind of starts to feel like he's just putting this information out there. He's definitely giving you information, but he's trying to spin it in a certain way so that you will agree with his overall opinion of sharing information online. All right, that's about it for this week. I think overall you guys are getting the hang of it, but please continue the good work.